Hi guys, I'm Greg.
I'm Libni.
And I'm Katie, and this is Chapter 13, Water Resources, APES, Coursables.
So our big question today is, Katie, will we have enough usable water?
Well, fresh water is an irreplaceable resource that we are using poorly. The excessive use of fresh water causes global health issues because there's no water for drinking and there's no water for sanitation, which is the leading cause of illness.
We are managing our water very poorly. Water takes up about 71% of our earth. You can go several weeks without food, but you can only go a few days without water. Now there are very many problems that water is causing. There's global issues, economic issues, issues with women and children, there's global issues, and the most important, environmental issues.
The excessive use of fresh water causes withdrawal from aquifers, water tables, rivers, and lakes, which equals shrinking lakes, loss of wetland, declining water quality, decrease in fish population, species extinction, degradation of ecosystems, and a lack of ecosystem services by aquatic systems.
Terrible, terrible. Another big problem is droughts. Droughts is when there is a prolonged period of time where the area has either 70% less precipitation rate or its evaporation is much higher than it usually is. Some of the other problems that could cause droughts are dry climates, too many people using one resource of water, and to me, the worst of all, wasteful use of water.
Previously, we mentioned a few vocab words. To clarify what they are, I used water table, which is the top of the groundwater zone, and aquifers, which are underground caverns and porous layers of sand, gravel, or bedrock through which groundwater flows.
So Katie and I are having a little bit of a dispute because she thinks that surface water is the best reliable resource for water, and I think that groundwater is.
Well, actually, Gregory, I don't think surface water is the most reliable resource when it comes to drinking and sanitation. I think it's more of a reliable resource for the United States, specifically the East, because Eastern United States uses fresh water for manufacturing, producing, and cooling power plants. So I think we should use surface water for that because this water comes from freshwater precipitation, and the snow melts and it all flows through the Earth's lands and rivers and streams and lakes and wetlands and estuaries and ultimately goes to the ocean. So this water is going to have debris, it's going to have pollution with it, it's going to have chemicals from fertilizers from crops because it's passing by all the lands. So I think we should use that water to cool power plants and manufacturing instead of using fresh water because it's a waste.
I respect that. You see, I think that groundwater is more reliable because it has its own purification system with aquifers. And the way we get groundwater is that first of all we have to hit the zone of saturation. The zone of saturation is basically where all the water is underground. And then once we hit the water table, which is the top of the groundwater, we can take out the water. Now the only problem with groundwater is that if we deplete it faster than it replenishes, then we won't have any more, obviously. And that's a problem with humans and just in general. So another major cause with groundwater is that it causes the land to subside or it causes sinkholes because of the foundation that is being lost. And if you don't believe us,
ask Libni.
Yeah, it's true.
So another one of our big questions is building more dams the answer?
Well, there are disadvantages and advantages of dams. The advantages include it provides drinking water for people, it can produce cheap electricity, it can reduce downstream flooding, and it has irrigation water above and below the dam. The disadvantages include flooded land destroys forests and crops, there's a loss of water from evaporation, it disrupts migration and spawning of certain fish, and it deprives downstream crops from nutrient-filled silt.
So going back to the fact on dams creating energy, they create it in a very actually interesting way. So basically when you have the dam, you have a small opening inside the dam where water comes through gravity, and it spins a turbine. And the turbine then spins a generator which creates electricity. That damn electricity, am I right?
Oh, you're right. question is transferring water from one place to another the answer?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was your part.
Oh, I don't.
Should
we just ask Libni?
Yeah.
Well, if you ask me, we have seen society transferring water from one place to another for quite some time. For example, in California, they had this thing called the California Water Project, which is one of the world's largest transfer water projects ever seen, which is a system that California has that they transfer water from the north down to the south, because the north and the regions like in Washington, they're really abundant in water. But the south of California is not. It's pretty desert. But that's where all of their agriculture is for some reason. So what they do is that they transfer the water from the north down to the south. And then farmers from the south run into a dilemma because government subsidies make it hard for them to actually invest in efficient irrigation systems and technologies. So it kind of goes back and forth. But it's a process that has been around for quite some time.
So my personal favorite way that we can get water is through desalination. There's different ways of desalination. So desalination is basically removing the salt from salt water and leaving the water so that we can drink it. So one of the ways is distillation. And distillation is basically where you have a container of water and you heat it up until all the water evaporates and it only leaves the salt, and you use that water and you can turn it into drinking water. Another way, it's a pretty cool word in my opinion, is reverse osmosis. And reverse osmosis is basically you pressurize water through a sifter and it sifts out all the salt. The holes are just big enough for the salt to get sifted out, and it leaves just the water, and again you can drink it.
Desalination primarily exists in the Middle East, but the US is secondary for the use of the process of desalination. The disadvantages of desalination are it only supplies 0.3% demand for water. Also, the extraction of seawater will place chemicals in the water that are used to prevent the algae that grows in it. And lastly, putting extracted salt back into the ocean higher the salinity and it kills fish. And if you don't believe us,
you can just ask Libni.
Libni. It's true.
Speaking of water resources, a huge part of water resources are large fresh bodies of water. Living in Chicago, we live by Lake Michigan. So earlier, we interviewed a fellow Chicagoan.
Hi, ma'am. Hi, I'm Katie from APES Coursables Networks. Can I interview you?
Yeah, sure.
Cool. What's your name?
Hi, I'm Becky Johnson.
Becky Johnson. I'm Katie. It's nice to meet you. Well, I'm going to inform you on Lake Michigan today.
You mean the ocean?
No, that's not an ocean. That's a lake, sweetie.
Oh.
We live in Chicago. Okay. Well, Lake Michigan and the Great Lakes are 20% of the fresh water in our entire planet, and scientists are starting to find tiny plastic particles in the lake that do not make it through the filters.
Oh my God.
Yes, and these plastic particles derive from fleecewear and body and face exfoliators.
We drink that.
And sports clothing.
Oh, honey, I would never wear sportswear. No.
She would never wear sportswear, folks. Okay, so Becky, what are your thoughts on tiny plastic particles in Lake Michigan and the harm that it can do?
I had no idea. It must be damaging our sharks.
Back to you, Gregory.
Our next topic is flood damage. An example of flood damage happened in Bangladesh in 2007, where 3,200 people died, 1.25 million livestock were killed, and millions were left homeless. So our next question is, how do we stop flood damage?
So first we need to know what a floodplain is. So a floodplain is when a river overflows its banks into the adjacent area, and that's where the floodplain is. Two major ways that we can lessen the threat of flooding is by, one, protecting more wetlands and natural vegetation in watersheds, which is basically a particular space of land which water flows into and drains into the river, and the other is by not building in areas that have frequent flooding, which makes sense to me, right?
Makes sense to me too.
Yeah. So Katie, now that we know all this about water, how can I become more sustainable?
I don't know.
You don't know? Should we
Maybe ask Libni?
Yeah, we should ask Libni.
Sustainable water use, don't deplete the aquifers, preserve water quality, protect forests, wastelands, and mountain glaciers, watersheds, and all natural systems that store and release water. What can you do? Water use and waste. Repair all the leaks that you have. Turn off the faucet, sink while brushing your teeth, shaving or bathing. Wash only full loads of clothes. Use recycled water for washing cars. Place your lawn with native plants that need little watering or none at all. Water use and waste, water use and waste,
I'm Greg.
I'm Libni.
And I'm Katie, and thank you for watching the APES Coursables.